Hey everyone, I'm Instructor Brooks, and welcome to the second video in our series on teaching fallacies. In this video, which is part 1 of 2, I'm going to talk to you about the appeal to tradition fallacy and how that creates a teacher-centered classroom, which is less effective for learning. So if you're ready to learn something, let's go. All right, everyone. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about the appeal to tradition fallacy, and this is part 1 of this little video series here. So, in our larger series on teaching fallacies. So, what is the appeal to tradition fallacy? Well, this is when something is expected to be true or better because it's the way it's always been done. And I'm sure all of you can think about a million different things that you yourself or other people do over and over again, even though it may not be the most effective because it is a tradition. So it's just the way things have always been done. So what is traditional learning? Traditional is synchronous learning, really, and this could be in person or online. If you have been doing any online teaching with COVID, and stuff like that, or having to teach from home, if you have to have the students online with you while you were talking, that is synchronous. And of course, when they're on campus and you're standing in front of the classroom and you're talking to them, that's obviously synchronous as well. So synchronous learning is a type of learning you would get in your traditional classroom. Everyone's there at the same time, interacting and taking in the same information simultaneously. And I think that's the key right there, simultaneously taking in the same information. Whatever the teacher's saying, all 30 or 5 or 10 or whatever amount of students are taking that information in at the exact time as everyone else. The synchronous settings are led and facilitated by the teacher or course instructor. The teacher is the boss. They're up in front of the classroom. It's obvious that there's a separation between teacher and students and even online. So what does the appeal to tradition fallacy look like in the classroom? Well, I'm going to be using the terms teacher-centered, or I might be calling it the blue classroom, because all of this is really building to a story that we're trying to tell about what we currently have, traditional classrooms, which are teacher-centered, which I call the blue classroom, and the next wave, or the modern classroom that we want to evolve into, the red classroom, or the student-centered classroom. But let's take a look at what the teacher-centered classroom looks like, and I'm sure all of us are going to be able to say, oh yeah, that's a classroom I have spent most of my time in as a student, or a classroom I've created as a teacher or instructor, and that's how I've done things. So what are the characteristics of the teacher-centered classroom? Well, let's look at the role of the teacher. First, the teacher is the sage on the stage. Literally, they have stages for teachers to stand on for lecture. Sometimes the teachers stand behind a podium, but again, there's that clear mark that the teacher is the gatekeeper to the information, and the students are recipients of that information, okay? So the teacher is the sage on the stage, the expert in charge, which that in itself, I think, kind of leads to some of the stress teachers have, feeling like they must be an expert. Now, compared to your students, probably should be, but, you know, you are held to such a high standard as the gatekeeper of information, and I don't think that's right. This imparts or transmits knowledge with students through lectures and presentations, okay? And we've talked about lectures and the transmission fallacy in the first video in this series. If you haven't watched it, highly recommend checking out. It's probably my favorite. Now, what's the role of the student in the teacher-centered classroom? Well, the student's job is generally to be a passive participant. They listen to the teacher talk. They absorb the information. Yeah, right. We talk about students being like a sponge, right? Absorbing all. Well, that's not happening, of course. And all of this information that they're supposed to absorb and listen to and get passively is transmitted by the teacher. That's generally what's happening right in that classroom. You've all had that. We've all been in this type of classroom. Now, what's the role of the assessment? That's probably a little thing that's a little surprising for you. Of course, you could think student-teacher, but what about assessing, okay? Well, assessments in a teacher-centered classroom are generally summative. And this means at the end, you have an exam that tests students on, the sum of all the parts that you've talked about for that either topic, that term, like a final exam, to give the students a grade. Well, I got to be able to give them a grade, says the teacher. So they make a test, which is the assessment to see what the students know. That's the purpose of assessments in the teacher-centered classroom. So how do students actually learn in a teacher-centered classroom? Well, they learn passively, which I previously mentioned. So students participate in passive review activities such as, and we all have to have this, and we all have done this, listening to lectures, reviewing PowerPoints, watching pre-recorded videos, and reading the text. Now, those things by themselves are not terrible. I mean, you got to read. You got to get information. But as you'll see through more videos and what I talk about in my strategies, that can't be the end. And that usually is the end of the story. A passive learning model that transmits information to students, and there you go. And that's the blue classroom. So what are the drawbacks to this type of classroom? Well, every classroom has pros and cons. So let's look at the drawbacks of this one. Now, these things here are the top 3 things that students and instructors that I've talked to, including myself, my own students, and all around the country, these are the top 3 things they complain about. Number 1 is that the student and instructor is overwhelmed because you feel like there's so much information coming at you, even if it's not an accelerated program like mine is, everyone feels overwhelmed. If you don't feel overwhelmed at some point, in class as a student or an instructor, kudos to you. Either you're not going over all the information or you just, I guess, are super relaxed. More power to you. Number 2, students have an inability to focus and pay attention. The Gen Z learner, in different sources that we've read, have an attention span of about 8 seconds. That is less than an Instagram story. You get like 15 seconds before it cuts and goes to another thing. 8 seconds. So you're telling me a 2 or 3 hour lecture, 45-minute lecture is appropriate? They're not paying attention, and you know this. Even if they're not looking at their phones or Facebook or Instagram or sending text messages, they're zoning out. Everyone's done it. It's the classic, take it away from technology and take it back to like the classic classroom where you're sitting in the wood chairs, students are doodling, drawing us up. Nobody's paying attention. No normal human being can stay focused that long through a basic lecture. And number 3, which I would say is probably the worst thing because of the amount of time and money that's spent on trying to learn this information to pass the boards, it's the decreased retention. Students and teachers definitely complain about this, that students, why don't you remember what we talked about last term? Or we just talked about that the other day. Well, it's because they haven't learned it. And I can prove this to you 100% that the current way we're teaching is not conducive to learning and is conducive to decreased retention is this. If students were retaining information, why would we make them buy this book? Why would we make them buy a Score Builders or other book that has them review for the board exam through passive strategies? This book is for review with basic assessments. There's a bunch, right? There's 3 practice exams in there, but it's just a bunch of information. Is it new information? Because it shouldn't be, because your syllabus that's hopefully been approved, I'm assuming, by CAPTE, and you are an accredited program, should already cover all the things you need. So why are we spending money on that book? Because when it's all said and done, we have to do a cram session of information because we haven't retained the information. So those are the drawbacks of the teacher-centered classroom. These are facts, these are researched, and anecdotally, these are the things people complain about. So why do teachers fall into this fallacy? And I did as well, and I'm still not perfect. So why did I fall into this fallacy where I thought like I had to have a teacher-centered classroom? Besides the fact that's the way we've all learned pretty much how to teach. Well, this minimizes for the instructor the concern that students are missing key material. The thing is, though, it's only minimizing your concern. It's not minimizing students missing key material because they are missing key material. You know that because they're missing questions on exams. They're not able to answer questions the next day. And it's proven with how they have to study for the boards. They are missing key material. You might go home and be able to go home and sleep at night and be like, yeah, I gave them all the stuff. Here's the thing. They didn't get it. That's why there's heavily decreased retention. And number two, for most teachers, they feel more comfortable because this allows them to be in control. You don't really have the students ask you a ton of questions because you could say, hey, we got to get through this lecture. You have a couple questions, but for the most part, it's a very singular process of the teacher just talking and the students listening. So the teacher has full control. All you have to do is make sure they're staying in their seats, and if the student usually feels, if they're in their seat, they're in there. They're learning through osmosis or whatever, which is not happening, of course. So how do we battle the appeal to tradition fallacy in the classroom? How do we get away from teacher-centered classrooms? Well, you got to switch to the student-centered classroom. And actually, I've looked at some websites of different schools, and it's interesting to see how they'll talk about, at such and such school, in this program, we have a student-centered mindset. Great buzzword, but not implemented with actual student-centered methodology. They care about the student maybe, but they're still implementing blue or teacher-centered classroom ideas. So how do we switch to the student-centered classroom? Well, that's your call to action. Number one, you take small steps to transition your classroom to student-centered. I've been working on this for over 3 years now, and in no way, shape, or form have I got it all down yet, but it's taken 3 years with little steps to slowly continue to build to a student-centered classroom. And you need to embrace the uncomfortableness of change. Change is hard for everyone. But remember, this uncomfortableness is only temporary because the success on the other side, once you grow, having that growth mindset, will lead to so many more benefits in the future. And like Brene Brown talks about, comfort over courage. Yes, you might be comfortable even you might be terribly comfortable, a horrible situation, but you know it. You know what to expect in this awful situation or this ineffective situation. And you don't have the courage to just get out of that or try something new because of that short temporary span of discomfort that all of us hate to have. And if you really want to know how to do it, you need to watch part 2 where I talk about what actually are the elements of a student-centered classroom. And like always, if you want more information, if you want the stuff that's just for members, you want access to my lessons, you want to be able to meet with me and talk to me and bounce ideas and create lessons, then you need to become a member of the InstructaWorks campus on YouTube. This is what my front page looks like on YouTube. Click the join button, and for less than the cost of 3 Starbucks coffees a month, you get me, everything I have made, everything I'm going to make, and you can help us grow this community, the InstructaWorks campus, so we can start crushing PTA school, make better classrooms, be better teachers, have better students, better clinicians, and just change the world. So, it's been great talking to you. Catch you in part 2 where I talk about the student-centered classroom. Peace out.